Good morning, everyone. My name is Laveena Iyer, and I'm the Global Tech and Telecoms Analyst at Economist Intelligence. Now, on to our next panel, where we'll discuss diversity, gender diversity in fintech, and I'd like to invite my two panelists, Nadine and Simon. Please join me.
Thanks.
Yes. So before we begin, I'd like a quick round of introductions. What you do, where you're coming from.
Of course.
Sure.
My name is Nadine Mezher. I think we lost our audience, but
Yes.
I'm a co-founder at Sarwa. We're a fintech company based out of the UAE, and we focus on wealth management. So again, tech company that has a mission of democratizing investing in the region.
Perfect. Simon?
Thanks, Laveena. Well, we'll talk loudly to try and draw some people back in. My name is Simon Hardie. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Findexable. We launched something called the Global Fintech Index. It's a big map, a big global index, a map of fintech ecosystems and companies worldwide. And as part of that effort, we sort of believe passionately about fintech solving real-world problems, including diversity in the world of financial services. And we launched something called the Fintech Diversity Radar, which was a big data exercise looking at 1,000 of the world's biggest, most successful scale-up fintech companies, and looking at the composition of their top teams, both the senior management and the boards. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the findings from that research.
Perfect. All right. So it's been very heartening to see the representation of women at the conference over the past 2 days. In fact, I've had the opportunity to meet some very exciting and inspiring fintech female founders. And I hope we're still represented by them in the crowd. But so despite this rapid innovation and disruption that the fintech industry has gone through, the one critical question that remains is, where are the women? And this is not just a Middle East specific problem. This is a global problem, like we discussed earlier. But there's a Cambridge University paper that actually refers to this problem as the triple glass ceiling. The problem where women face a challenge at the intersection of technology, entrepreneurship, and financial gender inequalities. So digging right into it, I think, Simon, it would be really helpful for us to just highlight some of the statistics relevant to the Middle East sector. Findexable's research has pointed out some very interesting statistics. What are the trends that you've noticed regarding the representation of women in fintech, Middle East, and how that is in comparison to other regions?
Yeah, thanks, Laveena. That's an important sort of starting point. I mean, the question is, where are all the women? Where are you? The challenge we found, this is, let's get the bad news out of the way. The statistics are appalling. I mean, there's no doubt, there's no way of mincing one's words. They are very disappointing. Financial services globally, has, in the sense of listed companies, has done marginally better over the last decade at improving the representation of women, both at workforces but also leadership and at boards. And at FinTech, we are just not seeing that. So, forgive me, but the challenge of doing this work is that it involves lots of numbers. So if this sounds like a maths lesson, I apologize. But I just want to take you through the kind of top line. So we looked at 1,000, as I say, 1,000 scale-up companies in fintech globally. It was balanced across regions, so we have a good worldwide distribution. The sort of top line numbers: 1% of fintechs were solely founded by women. So companies with only women founders was just 1% of those 1,000. 6% of founders in general are women, and 9 out of 10 boards had no women representation on them whatsoever. So the numbers are really, really quite challenging. There is a little bit of good news in the sense that Middle East and Africa, Middle East, North Africa in particular, doing quite a bit better at the level of the representation of women within companies and at board or founder level. actually the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, performing better than Europe at the level of women-founded companies. So impressive to see that this region, it's not just talking about entrepreneurship, but it's inspiring entrepreneurs across the board in a way that Europe has not. But as I say, the numbers are still pretty dire. And I think the great thing about having this conversation at an event like this, and good for Bahrain to do that, is to really kind of sort of try and identify some of the positive solutions that we can take, albeit in a challenging economic environment, but what can we do as individuals, as employees, as company founders and innovators to kind of drive this change? Because quite frankly, I think, fintech for us is about solving real problems. It's about driving inclusion. Inclusion has an ultimate benefit in the sense that not just us being all included in the marketplace, but also a bigger marketplace overall. But you can't do that unless your company and financial services as a whole looks like the real world.
Well, that's an interesting point that you made, against the backdrop of the macroeconomic challenges that we currently face globally. Nadine, I think this is where it would be very helpful to hear from your experience at Sarwa. Could you help us highlight what are some of the benefits of having a diverse team? How does it fuel innovation at Sarwa or any place else that you've noticed in the fintech space?
Well, I think ultimately diversity is really about being smart in business. We talk about profitability, and the reality, if you want to be profitable, you really need to be talking to your market. And if your market is open, then you need to have representation from all the different subsegments. So to us at Sarwa, it was extremely important, and we realized very quickly that having an inclusive culture and having a diverse team reflected positively on our financials. And that's not just at Sarwa. There are multiple reports out there, including, Simon, you've worked on a few, but you have the likes of Harvard Business Review that did a long study on the correlation between inclusivity, diversity, and, innovation. And it's a big positive correlation. There's McKinsey, you have BCG. So if all of these big firms who have done all of these reports are putting it out there that there is a correlation between the two, then I would actually start to listen. To give you an example, in the financial industry, you had a recent study looking into Europe, specifically across 134 banks, and they found that when you have a diverse leadership team, now we talk about leadership and we talk about why that's important, it impacts your financial statement massively. And that also, we need to talk about something that's very, very important, which is the inflection point. It's not about having one woman or two women on your board. It's about having really proper representation, because below that specific amount of diversification, and I think they talk about 30%, if I'm not mistaken, then you don't have the positive impact, because you have other impacts that kick in. So you need to really kind of have the right percentage of representation too.
Yep. That's very helpful, Nadine. How you mentioned the importance of change in company culture and leadership at the top. And just before the session, we were discussing some of the more practical steps. And Simon, you had a lot in mind to talk about what small fintech firms can do, given the few resources that they have in space. They are at a startup stage. What are some of those practical steps they can do? Things like mentorship, any other steps?
Yep. Thanks, Laveena. So, I mean, the big problem is, firstly, measurement. If you don't measure where you're at, it doesn't matter. And I think what we've been advocating is, across the board, whether it's pay levels, pure numbers, seniority, one needs to keep track of what's happening. I think we were talking, Nadine, about it's starting at the top. The company culture is very important. What we were also seeing in the research and with other research with other partners that we've done is that if there's no intention, these things don't change. It has to be driven from the top. It has to be thought about carefully. Of course, not to let the industry off the hook, but it's a challenging world out there. It's particularly this last 18 months. Funding is tough. Customers are stretched. The economy is going through a rougher patch. So, companies are fighting for survival, and unfortunately, what we're also seeing over the last 18 months is diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives have fallen off the list of priorities. There are just too many other things to do. Listed companies have the kind of advantage of being able to take sort of substantive actions of being regulated, and small companies just don't have those resources in many cases. So mentorship, both the kind of combination, very powerful combination of a leadership that thinks about this stuff, is thinking about not just about the product, but also about the kinds of people that their customers are going to buy from is important. Thinking about the talent and supporting the talent when they get it is also vitally important. There are lower cost things that one can do. Mentorship and networking programs are a big part of that. My sister, funnily enough, a couple of months ago was speaking at an AWS event, at a very high-profile data event hosted by the Natural History Museum of London. She was on a panel, a big panel, very senior people, and quite nervous about it. Did a great job. And afterwards, the really nice thing AWS did, there were 3 women on the panel. They created these avatars of women data warriors, which they could use, and they posted out on social media. And it's a small thing, but it goes a lot to driving back, giving confidence to people, and I think that's a big part of it. And just a final word, that confidence thing is so crucial. I think it gets overlooked. It's great if you've got a woman on the board. It's great if you've got a woman founder, but what you really need is the pipeline of talent, and that pipeline starts in schools. Well, we've got our own jobs to run. We can't necessarily help with that, but certainly the kind of bringing up people through the organization and giving them confidence is something that one can do. And just to say that a partner organization of ours did some work on imposter syndrome, and it's very much a real live thing. It affects men as well as women. The challenge is that men cover it up and sort of work through it, and women internalize the problem and quite often can self-sabotage. So, as innovators, founders, entrepreneurs, managers, that support and mentorship thing is possibly the most important thing we can do.
That's very helpful, Simon. And we always hear about people telling us what companies can do, what startups can do, what a government can do. But I think a lot of the responsibility and onus also lies on women leaders. And Nadine, I think you're a great example of how you've made space for yourself, some of the things you've done to reach to those leadership levels. As a woman who's trying to make her way in the fintech space in the Middle East, what would be your advice? What are some of the helpful tips that you'd like to share with other female founders?
Well, there's a lot of work to be done by the big corporates and government entities, and we talk about the top-down approach, and this has been really given its share of speech on the table. And I think when it comes to us individually, what we can do, you can seek mentorship. So we talk about mentorship, and it doesn't have to be institutionalized. It doesn't have to be something structured. It could be on an individual level, right? And we talk about the big corporates like Microsoft, Google, all of these having these programs in place. But Sarwa, let's say we were big on inclusivity at a basis from leadership down, from hiring up. And it boiled down to having really a 50-50 representation, and we're very proud of the numbers we have. And I think a big reason why Sarwa is successful is because of that diverse team. And by the way, diversity is not just gender, it also is about cultural diversity, background diversity, and having that ultimate representation. So mentorship is very key, putting yourself out in communities, being part of networking events, talking to as many people as possible, and realize a lot of women out there want to help, want to support. If they have the time and the ability, then they will do that automatically. Of course, deep dive into skills, right? Like make sure that you have the soft skills and you seek mentorship in the soft skills, leadership, managerial, technical, but also the technical side of things. So that's number 3, I would say, is really be your best advocate. I think, again, to Simon's point, we need to be talking about our achievement. We need to be our own personal advocate and pushing that boundary, because there's a lot of baggage that we carry in terms of the imposter syndrome, in terms of the cultural and societal baggage that we have. So it's very important to realize you can do it if you want to do it, it's a possibility. It's not an easy journey, but it's definitely very, very rewarding.
So the key takeaway for me is probably self-advocacy as another female in the industry. Before we wrap up very quickly, I think we can't leave the conversation without talking about regulation and the absence of it. In the presence of any kind of policy that mandates a certain amount of female founders at the leadership level, how do you think companies can still make their practices more transparent, still be held more accountable? What are some of the things we can do? I'd like to start with Simon, and then Nadine, I'll come back to you for the same.
Sure. Well, the simple thing is that ultimately, it's a hard ask to expect the regulator to come in, although in the long term, if we really want to see a substantive change, that is going to be the only way. I mean, we've been talking about diversity broadly, and particularly women in financial services, women in fintech, women in tech for a long time, and the numbers just don't budge. And in fact, they're going back the wrong way, I think, as we were talking earlier. It's got to be, you've got to measure it. There's got to be the sentiment that this does matter, and a focus on the fact that in the longer term, and this is part of the challenge, in the longer term, you create better, more valuable, more profitable companies. So to sort of think about it holistically, and I think do whatever it takes to kind of drive that message home to your teams. That's really what I think that is the most that one can do. And of course, some of the bigger technology companies, I think Apple in particular, Salesforce possibly also, they do think about work-life balance quite holistically. So the advantage of smaller, more agile technology companies is that they can offer that. The hybrid working model does work. Quite a lot of these companies are born digital to take advantage of that. But ultimately, the level of the support from senior management to help people of all ethnicities, genders succeed through the organization, that's the most valuable thing that can be done. And I think we collectively have a responsibility to do that. It's the only way that we're really going to see kind of change and ultimately build sort of the kind of industry that is representative of the wider world.
I love what Simon said about collectively having that responsibility, and I think it cascades down to that. Corporates have a responsibility. I think as a community, as a society, we have a responsibility to be better, to do better, especially given everything that's happening in today's world. I think representation is key, and we don't need, yes, regulators need to step in, but we don't need to just wait for regulators to do that. I think we have to, as corporates, set very clear goals, put metrics, really look into these metrics, measure them, and eventually, if we can do reporting, whether it's public reports or internal reports, but at least have clear reporting on where we stand and have we really achieved these goals or not.
Yep.
So,
and I don't know, can I finish with a very small story that happened yesterday to me? So I have a member of the family that's a doctor, a woman doctor. And because she's a woman doctor, her friends around her are women doctor. Her daughter came to her in front of everyone and asked her, she's like, "Mama, can men be doctors?" And I love that, and it shows the power of representation, right? Yeah. Because historically, there are industries that have been viewed to be specifically gender, male-oriented.
Right.
But then if you show more women, you're passing that message to a younger generation that it is possible that we can belong in that frame, and I think that's
breaking those legacy perceptions, is absolutely essential. There's no doubt about it. I think anything we can do to kind of say actually, there are arguably better reasons to have a woman as a CTO than a man, I can think of multiple reasons why that would be true. And I think those legacy perceptions are important. I think it's just worth remembering that it absolutely fascinates me. That in the 1940s, the 1950s, through the Second World War, women were front and center at cryptography, at technology roles, and women were perceived. Technology was perceived to be a woman's place, a domain. What we've seen, in the subsequent 70 years is massive backsliding. do want to leave on one positive note, though, which is to say that in Saudi Arabia, 60% of computer science students are women. So it is changing, and I think what's fascinating about this region is to break that mold, to break that kind of stereotype, is that women are actually doing a lot of good things in technology here, and again, collectively, it's our responsibility to help make sure that continues.
So some of the key takeaways, if I had to quickly sum them up: have intent to actually make change, collect the data, and hold companies responsible even in the absence of regulation and policy. I think that's a nice three-step takeaway for any fintech companies in the audience here today with us. But on that note, thank you so much, Nadine and Simon, to enlighten the audience, whatever's left with us right now before they rushed out for networking. But hopefully our panelists are available if you'd like to speak with them in the networking area. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We'll now break for a quick 20 minutes and then come back for another round of sessions. Please do join us. We have some very exciting speakers lined up for you in the second half.